Welcome to Bedtime Astronomy. Explore the wonders of the cosmos with our soothing bedtime astronomy podcast. Each episode offers a gentle journey through the stars, planets, and beyond, perfect for unwinding after a long day. Let's travel through the mysteries of the universe as you drift off into a peaceful slumber under the night sky.
When you really stop and think about it, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, it has this incredible romantic quality to it. It feels like the ultimate human quest.
It does.
Yeah.
But there's a flip side, a very practical, almost brutal reality to it.
Which is
that finding proof, finding that one single artificial signal in all the noise, it's not a quest for poets. It's a colossal data processing problem.
right. It's a triumph of computation over poetry, as you said. The adversary isn't the distance, not really. It's the sheer volume of static you have to sift through.
Exactly. And not just cosmic static. Our own noise, the stuff we generate here on Earth, is just overwhelming.
And that specific challenge, the problem of computation at an almost unimaginable scale, that is exactly what we're exploring today.
We're looking at the final comprehensive analysis of the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence at Home project. SETI at Home.
A project that was so much more than a science experiment. It was a cultural phenomenon. It ran for, 21 years?
Right.
From 1999 all the way to 2020.
And it was all built on the spare processing power of millions of ordinary people's computers around the world.
So these final papers, published just last year, they're not just a simple, we looked and found nothing report.
Not at all. For you listening, this is a masterclass in scientific methodology. We're going to get a shortcut through 2 decades of trial and error.
We'll see how they managed to take 12 billion. That number is just staggering. 12 billion raw detections and filter them all the way down to just 100 interesting candidates.
And that filtering, that process of winnowing down the data, that's the real scientific breakthrough here. The lessons they learned are now foundational for any big sky survey.
Okay, so let's unpack it. The history, the scale, and how crowdsourcing was the only way they could possibly have solved this.
And I'm ready to get into the technical side of it, those final papers.
Yeah.
How they used these ingenious fake signals, they called them birdies, to test their own system. It's a fantastic story of technical ingenuity meeting just overwhelming scale.
So to really get it, you have to picture the mid-1990s. It's easy to forget how limited computing was back then.
Oh, absolutely. Especially for academic projects. You didn't just get time on a supercomputer. That was for national labs, huge corporate research.
Not for a bunch of astronomers at a university looking for aliens.
Exactly. But that scarcity, it really drove the innovation here. Over at UC Berkeley, you had this computer scientist, David Anderson, and he was already deep into this idea of distributed computing.
Which is basically taking a massive problem and breaking it into tiny little pieces.
Tiny, manageable chunks that you could then send out to thousands of smaller, less powerful computers to solve independently.
And he just needed the perfect problem to test this idea on a huge scale.
And the problem found him. He came from one of his former students, David Getty, who suggested, why not apply this to SETI?
A perfect match.
A perfect marriage of problem and solution. Because analyzing radio data is what we call an embarrassingly parallel problem.
Meaning you can analyze one little slice of the data without needing to know anything about the slice next to it. They're all independent jobs.
Precisely. You could take a tiny recording from a radio telescope, chop it up into thousands of different frequency chunks, and send each chunk to a different volunteer's computer.
So they realized they could tap into this huge, growing network of home PCs, the old Windows 95 boxes sitting on people's desks.
The ones that were just sitting idle most of the day, while you're at work or getting lunch. Their CPUs were just waiting for something to do.
And that was the core idea. Use that volunteer power to hunt for artificial patterns, these technosignatures in the noise.
So Anderson, along with Eric Corpella and Dan Wertheimer, they launched it in 1999. And the public response, it wasn't just big, it was seismic.
They had a goal in mind, right? A number of volunteers they needed to make the science viable.
They did. Their initial calculation was that if they could get 50,000 volunteers, 50, that would be enough computing power to do something genuinely new, something they could never get a traditional grant for.
50,000 was the benchmark for success.
And what happened was, as Anderson put it, way, way, way beyond our initial expectations.
So what were the actual numbers?
Within just a few days of launch, they had 200,000 people sign up from over 100 different countries.
Wow.
And by the end of that first year, they had 2 million users. 2 million people donating their spare computer time to the search.
That's just, it's a testament to the public's hunger to be part of something this profound.
Yeah.
It proved the concept, really, that you could do real sophisticated science this way.
It absolutely did. It became one of the most visible and successful citizen science projects ever.
Okay, so we have the computer network, millions of processors ready and waiting, but what are they processing? Where did the actual data come from?
It came from a legend, the Arecibo Observatory in Puerto Rico.
The giant 300-meter dish built into a sinkhole, the biggest in the world for so long.
That was the fire hose. It was
Yeah.
the input for the whole system, just funneling raw cosmic static to Berkeley to be chopped up and sent out.
And of course, that telescope was tragically lost in 2020, which is what brought the data collection part of the project to an end.
A huge loss for science. But for 21 years, it performed flawlessly for this project.
And the way they collected the data was also key to why this whole thing was even possible. This idea of commensal observing.
Right, commensalism. It's a term from biology, where one organism benefits and the other isn't really affected.
So in astronomy, it means what? You're essentially hitching a ride.
You are. You're getting data without having to fight for precious, expensive telescope time. See, other astronomers would be using Arecibo for their own research.
Like mapping hydrogen gas in the galaxy or timing pulsars, things like that.
Exactly. And the SETI at home team just had their own recording equipment hooked up, passively listening in on whatever the main observer was looking at.
So they weren't booking time on the telescope. They were just recording whatever came in while someone else was using it.
Incredibly efficient. And it's what allowed them to cover so much of the sky.
How much did they cover over those 2 decades?
Over the project's lifetime, they observed about a third of the entire celestial sphere. Basically everything you can see from Puerto Rico.
And critically, it wasn't just a one-off look. Repetition is key, right?
It's everything. You have to see a signal more than once to believe it. Most of the areas they covered were observed a dozen or more times. Some spots, hundreds, even thousands of times.
So as Anderson said, they basically covered most of the stars in our galaxy, billions and billions of them.
Which is why Corpella could confidently say it was, without doubt, the most sensitive narrowband search of large portions of the sky. They had the breadth, even if they couldn't control exactly where the telescope pointed at any given moment.
Okay, so millions of volunteers get their little data packets from Arecibo, their computers crunch the numbers, and they send the results back. The input side is solved. Now let's talk about the output, the result of all that computation.
And the scale is, again, just mind-boggling. After 21 years of this, the collective effort produced 12 billion raw detections.
12 billion. Let's define a detection here. What does that actually mean?
It's just a momentary blip, a little spike of energy at a particular frequency coming from a particular spot in the sky. The software's job was to flag every single one of those blips.
And for each blip, it would analyze frequency, intensity, position.
Right. And to do that, it used a mathematical tool called a discrete Fourier transform.
The DFT. Explain why that's so essential here.
Well, think of the radio signal from space as just white noise, right? A mess of every frequency mixed together. A real technosignature, an alien beacon, would probably be a very pure, narrow signal, like a single clear note on a piano.
Because that's the most energy-efficient way to be heard over the background noise. Natural things are noisy and broad. Artificial things are clean and narrow.
That's the assumption. The DFT acts like a prism for that noise. It takes the messy signal and breaks it down into all its component frequencies, into tiny little bins, so you can spot that one single sharp spike.
But that wasn't the hard part, was it? The real computational killer was something else.
The real killer was the Doppler drift. This is why they needed millions of computers.
This is where that incredible 10,000 times multiplier comes from.
It is. You have to appreciate all the motion that's happening. The Earth is spinning, it's orbiting the sun, our whole solar system is moving, and whatever star system might be sending the signal is also moving.
It's like the pitch of a train horn changing as it passes you. A signal sent at a fixed frequency won't arrive at a fixed frequency because of all that relative motion.
Precisely. Its frequency will appear to drift. So if you're only looking at one specific tiny frequency bin, you'll miss the signal as it drifts out of that bin.
So the software couldn't just look for a spike. It had to look for a spike that was moving, that was drifting across the frequency bins.
Exactly. And since they didn't know how fast the source was moving, they had to check for all the possibilities.
And all the possibilities turned out to be a lot.
Tens of thousands. For every single data point, the software had to check tens of thousands of possible drift rates.
So you take your already huge computational problem and you multiply it by 10,000.
That's the multiplier. And that's why Anderson says no other radio SETI project had ever been able to do this. It was only possible because they could farm out that insane workload to the public.
So they solved this monumental computing problem. They processed the 12 billion blips, they did the Doppler analysis, but then they hit the wall that every radio search hits.
The RFI wall. Radio frequency interference.
Our own junk.
Our own junk. It's the central problem in modern SETI. The vast majority of those 12 billion detections were just us.
Well, we're not just talking about obvious things like TV broadcasts, are we?
Oh, no. I mean, you have the predictable stuff. Satellites in orbit, ground-based radar, GPS, but then you have all kinds of bizarre, mundane interference.
Like the famous microwave oven example.
The microwave is a classic. The magnetron inside it pumps out a burst of radio noise. If a receiver happened to be pointed in just the right direction to catch a reflection of that off a satellite or even the atmosphere.
It would look like a powerful narrow band signal from deep space.
For a moment, yeah.
Yeah.
It creates a false positive. And the real challenge, as Eric Carpella put it, is the baby with the bathwater problem.
How do you design your filters to throw out all the noise without accidentally throwing out the one real signal you're looking for?
It's a huge methodological challenge. If your filter's too aggressive, you could delete a genuine faint signal just because it happens to look a little bit like a satellite passing overhead. You have to be able to prove what you're excluding.
And this leads us to one of the most interesting parts of the story, a really candid admission from the team.
The planning flaw.
They had this brilliant solution for the front-end problem, the data collection and processing. But the back end, the analysis of all those results, it lagged way behind.
Yes, David Anderson was very open about this. He said that for years, basically up until around 2016.
So for 17 years.
For 17 years, they were accumulating all these detections from volunteers, but they didn't really know what we were going to do with them. They hadn't fully worked out the second half of the process.
That's amazing. Data is just piling up for over a decade and a half. Why? What was a bottleneck?
Well, the initial priority was just getting the volunteer computing part to work, the BOINC platform. And remember, in the early days, you had people on dial-up modems. So the analysis on the home PC had to be kept relatively simple.
Right.
The really heavy lifting, cross-correlating all 12 billion detections against each other to find signals that appeared more than once from the same spot, that required a massive centralized computer with a ton of memory and storage.
Which they didn't have at the beginning.
They didn't have it funded or available. So the solution meant a complete shift in strategy, from millions of tiny computers to one giant one.
And that's where the Max Planck Institute in Germany came in.
Exactly. They got access to a powerful computing cluster there. And that's what finally allowed them to do the big, sophisticated culling process.
So what did that supercomputer do that the home PCs couldn't?
It systematically ran the final stage filtering algorithms across the entire data set. It was looking for known RFI signatures, and most importantly, it was checking for persistence over time. Did a signal from this spot in the sky show up in 2002, and then again in 2008, and again in 2015?
And that's how they did the first major cut.
That's how they got from 12 billion detections down to a much more manageable number. A couple of million signal candidates.
So a candidate is a signal that showed up more than once from roughly the same place.
More or less the same place, more or less the same frequency, but spread out over time. That's the key. That repetition is what makes it interesting.
Okay, so a couple million candidates. Now they have to prove their search actually worked. They need to define how sensitive it was.
And this is where my favorite part of the whole project comes in. It's just so clever. The birdies test.
The birdies test. It sounds like something from golf.
It's one of their greatest scientific legacies. To figure out how good their system was, they created about 3,000 fake signals, the birdies.
And they injected these fake signals into their own data pipeline.
They did, right at the very beginning, before any of the filtering started. And crucially, they blinded themselves. They didn't know where the fake signals were or how powerful they were. They just treated them like any other blip from the telescope.
So it's a perfect self-calibration. They run the entire 21-year data set through all their filters, and then at the end, they check to see how many of their fake birdies survived the process.
Precisely. If they put in 100 birdies at a certain power level and only 95 came out the other end, they know their system has a 95% detection efficiency for signals of that power.
Which lets them make a really powerful scientific statement.
A definitive one. They can finally say, if there were a signal above this specific power level, in the parts of the sky we looked at, we would have found it.
That's huge. So it's not just we didn't find anything, it's we didn't find anything stronger than X. It sets a hard limit for the first time.
It sets the baseline for all future searches. But, this rigorous process also forced them to be very critical of their own work. Anderson admitted, the project didn't completely work the way we thought it was going to.
What kind of flaws did they find in their own process?
A lot of it came down to compromises they had to make because of the technology in 1999. For example, to save processing time on those slow home PCs, the Doppler drift bins they checked were maybe a little too wide.
So a real signal could have, fallen between the cracks?
It could have. If its drift rate was exactly between two of the rates they were checking, it might have been missed, even if it was strong. Similarly, some of the early RFI filters were a bit too simple, and they might have accidentally thrown out a good signal because it looked too much like a known piece of interference.
All right, so they've got their millions of candidates, they've tested their sensitivity, now they have to get to the final list, the real contenders.
Right. They applied a ranking system to those millions of candidates, looking at things like how persistent they were, how clean the signal was. That got them down to the top 1,000.
And at this point, the algorithms are done. It's time for the humans to step in.
Corpella and Wertheimer, they personally, manually reviewed those top 1,000 signals.
What are they looking for at that stage? What makes one signal better than another?
They're looking for the smoking gun. They're examining the frequency plots by hand, checking the signal's behavior against databases of known satellite paths, known sources of terrestrial RFI. It's painstaking detective work.
And that intense human-led review is what produced the final list.
The final 100. About 100 signals that are persistent, narrow, and that they cannot definitively explain away as our own noise. These are the ones deemed worthy of a second look.
And the criteria for what's worthy is all based on this big assumption we have about what an alien signal would even look like, right?
Absolutely. The whole search is guided by this model of an ideal technosignature.
And that ideal is what? A big, powerful, narrowband signal.
Powerful, narrowband, and probably at a special frequency. A universal signpost.
The famous water hole.
Exactly. Specifically, near the 21-centimeter wavelength, which is the frequency of neutral hydrogen gas. Hydrogen is the most common thing in the universe.
Yeah.
So the logic is, any advanced species would know to look there. It's like putting a billboard on the intergalactic highway.
So the assumption is a two-part message. A big, simple hello, and then the actual content.
That's the working hypothesis. You have this powerful, narrowband beacon that's just a flag, just to get our attention. Once we find that, we'd point everything we have at that spot and look for a weaker, wider band signal right next to it that contains the actual information.
But let me push back on that a bit. Aren't we just projecting our own technology onto them? We're looking for radio because that's what we know. A civilization millions of years ahead of us might be using something we can't even imagine.
That is a fundamental philosophical problem at the heart of SETI.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. We're looking for something we would know how to build. It's a search under the streetlight.
So we could be totally deaf to a signal that's using, I don't know, gravity waves or something.
Or neutrinos or some kind of quantum communication. Yes. So this result, this non-detection, is powerful, but it's constrained by that very specific assumption about the communication method.
Which brings us to the ultimate conclusion. After all of that work, the 21 years, the millions of volunteers, the supercomputers, the scientific fact is no definitive signal was detected.
And that's a tough pill to swallow. Corpella admitted to feeling a little disappointment that we didn't see anything. In that one very specific sense, the primary goal wasn't met.
But in every other sense, it was a massive success.
A monumental success. Anderson was very clear about this. As a project for community engagement and for proving a new way of doing science, it went so far beyond their wildest dreams. It literally pioneered this entire field of volunteer computing.
And they put a definitive cap on it with the publication of those two big papers last year in the Astronomical Journal.
Those papers are the project's technical legacy. The first one, Data Acquisition and Front-End Processing, is basically the blueprint for how to collect and distribute this kind of data.
How the Arecibo commensal observing worked, the architecture of the BOINC platform.
Right. And the second paper, Data Analysis and Findings, is all about the back end, the filtering, the RFI rejection, and crucially, the results of that Birdie's test. It lays out the exact sensitivity they achieved.
And it provides the list of the 100 candidates. It's not just the result, it's showing all their work so the entire scientific community can build on it.
That's right. It's a completely transparent, peer-reviewed conclusion to one of the biggest science experiments ever run.
And that's not the end of the story, because that list of 100 signals is now the focus of a new search.
The journey continues. Those 100 potential golden tickets are now being targeted by a much, much more powerful telescope.
China's 500-meter aperture spherical telescope. FAST.
FAST is the logical next step. It's the new king of radio astronomy, and it has a game-changing advantage over Arecibo.
How much more powerful are we talking?
In terms of raw collecting area, which is what really matters, FAST is about 8 times bigger than Arecibo was.
8 times. So that translates directly into sensitivity, right?
Directly. It means if a signal was truly real, but just too faint for Arecibo to see clearly, FAST should be able to pick it up with ease. You can see things that are 8 times fainter.
So the follow-up is already happening.
It is. Since last summer, FAST has been pointing at these 100 targets. For each one, it's staring for about 15 minutes.
And 15 minutes with FAST is worth a lot more than 15 minutes with Arecibo.
A whole lot more.
Right.
Now, the analysis of that new data isn't complete yet. Anderson is very measured about it. He doesn't necessarily expect to find anything.
You have to look.
You absolutely have to look. It's the only way to close the loop on the SETI at Home project. If a signal does reappear, it becomes the biggest discovery in human history. If none do, it makes the original negative result that much stronger.
This follow-up also highlights a big strategic difference in how we search. SETI at Home was this huge all-sky survey,
Casting the widest possible net.
whereas most modern projects, like Breakthrough Listen, are doing targeted searches.
Right. They're taking telescopes like Green Bank or Meerkat and pointing them at very specific nearby stars that we know have planets.
So they're trading that wide coverage for a much deeper, more concentrated look at a few promising spots.
And that's the fundamental trade-off. Corpella points out that even with our best modern telescopes, a targeted search can only detect a transmitter the size of Arecibo if it's relatively nearby, galactically speaking.
They can't probe the other side of the galaxy very effectively.
Not really. And the other big difference is control. SETI at Home couldn't control the telescope. They were just along for the ride.
Whereas Breakthrough Listen has dedicated telescope time. They can point it where they want for as long as they want.
And Corpella says that's really the ideal scenario.
Yeah.
Having control is everything. So it's this constant tension in the field. Do you go for breadth or do you go for depth?
And even though the SETI project itself is over, the technology it created is more alive than ever.
The BOINC platform. That's the lasting engineering triumph. Anderson didn't just build a piece of software for one project. He built an open source framework that any massive science project can now use.
And they are using it for all sorts of things completely unrelated to aliens.
The diversity is amazing. You have Rosetta at Home, which is using volunteer computers to calculate how proteins fold. That's critical for designing new drugs.
There's Einstein at Home, too.
Right, searching for pulsars and gravitational wave data. And LHC at Home is helping CERN simulate particle collisions. So the legacy is thriving in biology, astronomy, physics.
So could you do another SETI crowdsourcing project today? Is it still a viable idea?
Corpella thinks it's absolutely feasible and probably easier in many ways. Computers are faster, of course. But the really big change is internet bandwidth.
Right. No more dial-up modems.
Exactly. They had to keep the data chunks tiny back then. Today, with broadband, you could send much bigger, more complex chunks of data to each volunteer, which would be way more efficient.
So the technology is better, the volunteer spirit is probably still there. What's the roadblock?
Money. But not for the computers. For the people.
You still need a paid staff to run the whole thing.
You need engineers, scientists, project managers. As Corpella notes, while the computing is free, it's not the cheapest way to do SETI because you have to fund the salaries of the team, coordinating millions of people and billions of data points. That's the real bottleneck now.
As we get to the end of our look at this, there's one final thought from Corpella that I find really haunting.
It's the great hope and maybe the great frustration of any archival search.
Right.
He said, there's still the potential that ET is in that data, and we missed it just by a hair.
And not because of carelessness, but because of those engineering compromises they were forced to make back in 1999.
Exactly. He said if he had the funding, his dream would be to reanalyze the entire 21-year data set from scratch, to fix the mistakes that we made.
Like using finer-toothed combs for the Doppler drift so nothing falls between the cracks.
And applying all the new, sophisticated, AI-driven RFI filters that have been developed since. A signal that was wrongly flagged as noise in 2003 might be correctly identified as a candidate today. The data is still there. It's just waiting for better tools.
The potential for discovery is still sitting on those hard drives. That's a powerful idea.
So, if we were to boil it all down, There are probably 3 huge takeaways from this whole incredible saga.
Okay, let's hear them.
First, just the historical scale of it. It proved the power of crowdsourcing, brought millions of people into the scientific process, and gave us the BOINC platform that's still driving science today.
Second, the sheer technical challenge. Tackling 12 billion signals, dealing with that 10,000x Doppler multiplier, and building the filters to get that down to just 100 candidates.
And third, the scientific legacy. Using those birdies to establish a hard scientific sensitivity limit. They gave future astronomers a definitive line in the sand. We now know what wasn't out there, which helps us focus on where to look next.
So SETI at home didn't find ET, but it wrote the rulebook for how to conduct the modern search.
Which brings us to the final, really provocative thought. What if? What if one of those 100 candidates, now being checked by FAST, actually reappears?
If that powerful narrowband signal is confirmed just once.
Everything changes. Every telescope on Earth, radio and optical, would turn to that one single spot in the sky.
And you have to consider the impact of just that confirmation. Not the message, not the content, just the simple verified fact that a beacon is there. The, hello, we are here.
Humanity's place in the cosmos would be fundamentally redefined in that instant. Our cosmic loneliness would be over. And that knowledge, that possibility, is what keeps the search alive.
It's what keeps scientists looking not just at new data, but back into those old archives, waiting for the right key to unlock their secrets.
The results are in, but the story might not be over.
Thank you for joining us for this look into the sources. We'll see you next time.